Let us look at graphical illustrations of the end value management. You have a vertical axis known as the project cost or labeled project cost, and the horizontal axis as the time schedule or timelines. For you to perform an end value analysis, you need to pick a date within the project schedule. So the date of the data is set as this, probably 50% or halfway through the project duration. So at halfway through the project duration, our planned value and budget at completion can be seen because the project S curve would have been drawn from the initial stages. So we know the budget at completion. So at the date of data, you would then determine the value or the budget that has been exhausted. Now, at the date of this data, we can determine the actual cost so far used. And then we can determine the value earned at that same 50% duration. So if the project is a 12-month duration project, at 6 months, we can perform or we can look at these values. So how do we determine the cost variance and the schedule variance? At these points, the schedule variance can be determined by picking the value at the date of the data for end value and the value for the planned value. So we can see that the end value is lower and the planned value is higher. Now let's look at the cost variance as well, which is the difference between the end value and the actual cost. We can also see that the end value is quite lower for that date of data than the actual cost. The actual cost is also well above the planned value. So it is obvious that since the actual cost is well above the end value, the project is running over budget. There is a cost overrun. Because we earn very little from the project, we have gone above the budget we are working with and have incurred more cost. So the end value is smaller than the actual cost. And therefore, a negative cost variance indicates the project is over budget. Let's look at the interpretation for the schedule variance. In this case, the end value is smaller than the planned value, therefore there is a negative schedule variance, which indicates the project is behind schedule. This is one form of the graph where the actual cost is higher than the planned value, and the planned value is also higher than the end value. Let's take a look at another form of the graph with our project costs on the vertical axis and our time schedule on the horizontal axis, and with a set date of the data. Let's look at our actual cost, our planned value, and our end value at this date of data. So we have our planned value and our budget at completion for the S curve. And in this case, the actual cost is lower than the planned value. And the end value is higher above the planned value and the actual cost. So let's look at the cost variance and the schedule variance. So the cost variance is end value minus planned value. As we can see, the end value is well above the planned value, so there is certainly going to be a positive variance. And in this case also, the end value is higher than the actual cost, that is the cost variance, and therefore would have a positive cost variance. So the end value is greater than the planned value, therefore a positive schedule variance indicates the project is ahead of schedule. And in terms of cost variance, there's a positive cost variance indicating the project is under budget. It means we are working within budget and there is every indication that the project will be profitable. Now let us take another form of graph. We have our project cost and the project cost on the vertical axis and the time schedule on the horizontal axis. We have our date of data and we have our planned value or project S curve with the planned value at the date of data and the budget at completion at the end of the project. We have our actual cost well below the planned value, and we have our end value greater than the actual cost but less than the planned value. Let us interpret what the schedule variance and the cost variance will look like. So the schedule variance is end value minus planned value. In this case, the end value is lower than the planned value, and therefore there will be a negative schedule variance. And for the cost variance, the end value is well above the actual cost, and therefore there will be a positive cost variance. So the end value, as is smaller than the planned value, suggests that there is a negative schedule variance and that the project is behind schedule. Conversely, the end value here is greater than the actual cost, indicating a positive cost variance and that the project is under budget or within budget. It is good for the project in terms of cost, but not good in terms of time. So they need to do some fast tracking, doing some projects or some activities parallel to others in order to get a project on track. Let's look at another graphical illustration. We have our project costs on the vertical axis and the time schedule on the horizontal axis. We have our date of data and have our project S-curve with the planned value and the budget at completion indicated. Now we have our actual cost well above the planned value, and we have our end value also bigger than both the actual cost and the planned value. So let's look at the interpretations. So the schedule variance is end value minus the planned value, and the cost variance is the end value minus the actual cost. In this case, the end value is greater than the planned value, and therefore there is a positive schedule variance, and the work or the project is ahead of schedule. And we have the end value also greater in terms of cost variance than the actual cost, and therefore the project is under budget. This is a very good indicator of a good project ahead of schedule and working under budget. It's quite a positive indication of a project that is being managed well. There could be other graphs where we'll have the actual cost well above all of them and so on. It is the interpretation of the schedule variance and the cost variance that matters most, since the end value management is about cost and time. And when the end value in all the cases is lower than the actual cost and the planned value, it means the project is suffering either in terms of cost or in terms of time or in terms of both. And therefore, in those cases, you can fast track or you can crash the project in order to get it completed within the specified duration.